Mr. Owaisi, may I ask you a question about your views on the reservations issue? Now, Mr. Gopal is fighting a case in the Supreme Court against reservations for economically weaker sections. Now, do you think this has consequences for reservations in other areas and for minorities or any other? How does it change the social system? What are your views on how it might affect, say, federalism as a whole?
With your permission, can I just add a point before answering your question?
Sure.
You see, we know for a fact that federalism is a basic structure of our constitution. Now, if a cabinet secretary sitting in Delhi decides to impose a lockdown in the country, the states could have said nothing doing, we will not accept it, because law and order is a state issue. I, for one, in my state, I have written an article and I have publicly made the statement that the Telangana government should not have accepted this lockdown, because what would an officer sitting in Delhi know about what is happening in a district like Rangareddy or Nizamabad? You know, we allow them. We have allowed them to, you know, we accepted this lockdown. What can judiciary do in that? You know, why did we accept that lockdown? When it comes to GST, why did we accept GST? Now, we should have raised voices. Some few states had opposed it. There are numerous examples wherein the states have succumbed to the supreme leader. And the supreme leader wants to he wants to basically doesn't believe in diversity. So it is for the state governments also to stand up. Now, there are so many instances. We don't get share in cess. The 50,000 crores, the states are being denied. But we are still begging with the government. And when the finance ministers asked the finance minister, she said, it's an act of God, what can we do? So it is a responsibility of the state governments to also be very firmly, and then the last point, we are not in 1950, where the center had to be strong. We are now in 2022, wherein, the states must assert themselves, and the union government should, allow the states to take care of health, education, agriculture, everything. Now, coming to the reservation point, I had opposed in Parliament, in fact, voted against this 10% reservation, this economic weaker section. As far as I know, where is this question of economic weaker section? Where is it in Constitution? Please tell us. And the 50%, you don't want 50%, the limit is 50%. Within that 50%, you have this 10%. So what about the population which is socially, educationally backward? The reason I'm saying is that I can live without reservation as a Muslim community, but I cannot live with injustice. My backwardness is based on the empirical evidence, and it should be given to us. But even reservation has now become a political tool for everyone. You want to give it to Jats, you want to give it to Patels, you want to give it to Gujars. So this 10% will definitely have an impact on the federalism, and I must really thank the professor for making a stellar argument in the Supreme Court. He made a fantastic argument, and I'm thankful to him for making those points and bringing it to the notice of the Honorable Supreme Court. Thankfully, let us hope that this constitutional bench will decide this matter. But it is unconstitutional to have reservation on economic grounds. This is my opinion.
Professor Gopal, would you like to say something about the case that you have been fighting in the Supreme Court against reservations for economically weaker sections? And do you think it impinges on state autonomy, for example, Tamil Nadu's social justice movement, for example?
Yes, sir. Certainly, yes. I'm in the middle of those arguments. I'm going back to Delhi to resume the arguments on Tuesday. We have another 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. The bench is giving us a hearing and listening to what we are saying. But the fundamental question that you raise is what federalism and reservation is both about representation. If you look at the Constituent Assembly debates, you will see that all those who spoke on behalf of dominant privileged communities saw reservation as a tool of economic upliftment and alleviating backwardness. But everyone who spoke on behalf of marginalized sections and minorities saw reservation as a tool of representation, for a share of power, for voice in government, as a tool of Swaraj. For us, federalism is also a tool of Swaraj, because we do not want to be ruled by a central unified force. We don't want centralization. Now, many progressive leaders of our country, including Dr. Ambedkar, initially thought that, like in the United States, they could use a strong union in order to fight against the regressive forces at the local level, the caste system, and so on and so forth. But that was in those days. Today, actually, it's reversed. A lot of the regression has come to the national level, and the progressive forces have come to the state level. So the fight against, in the economically weaker section, is ultimately a fight over representation of minorities, both inside and outside the so-called majority community. And it is being misrepresented as economic weaker sections. Why? In order to continue the oligarchy, the power of the oligarchy that rules this country, and get another 10% for that oligarchy. If you really look at it, it's not economic reservations at all. It is reservation for socially and educationally forward classes who are financial incapacity. The title is economically weaker section, but the criteria is not having enough money in the bank or not having a house or land. It's financial incapacity, which can come from losing a bet or a gamble or something. And so you're misrepresenting to the nation that this is for economically weaker section. Second and last thing about the misrepresentation is that you are giving preference to not very poor people in preference to the very poor people, because you're concerned that there's so much of poor people in this country that if you give reservations on the pure economic criteria to the poor, your own people who are not so poor, the not so poor will get crowded out. They will not get the reservation. The real poor will get the reservation if you use economic criteria. And therefore, you want to protect your own communities, not very poor people. So economically weaker section reservation is actually for not so economically weaker sections of the upper caste. Why? Because if you open it up as truly economic weaker section, the poorest are so many in number that the not so economically weaker section of the upper caste will never get reservation. So you're creating a carving out for them. If for the first time in the history of India, the Supreme Court endorses an amendment that creates a reservation for not so economically weaker sections of forward castes, then frankly it's a betrayal of the Constitution and a destruction of the very spirit of the Constitution. This is what we are arguing, and I think whether it is federalism or whether it is reservation, it is a struggle for representation, it's a struggle for self-government, for Swaraj, for all of us. And we must not forget, if you read the basic structure doctrine or if you read the Keshwananda Bharati case, the ultimate rationale and nature and character of all our fundamental rights, including the fundamental right to reservation, is to protect minorities. So this is a majoritarian incursion against a scheme to protect minority rights. And we should also see federalism, the need to protect federalism, as part of that larger scheme of protecting weaker sections. The Minorities Committee in the Constituent Assembly did not refer only to religious minorities. It referred to anyone who was weaker as minority. And it is that must bring us together to protect federalism in this country, not because America is federal, and not because other countries are federal, but we have to give voice to the voiceless and the weak. So that's where this comes together.
I have some difference of opinion with prospective speakers. I look at reservation debate from the perspective of mobilizing the vast majority of Indian people, poor people, half the population against the other half the population. Therefore, from the perspective of mobilizing the poor, irrespective of the caste also, in order to protect reservation itself, which is under severe challenge, that you provide weaker section among the forward caste also a small percentage without affecting the existing quota for the weaker caste. So that this is an instrument to ensure the widest possible unity of the people. That's the political perspective from which I live.
Thank you. We'll now open the questions to the floor. Whoever wants to ask a question, please raise your hand and somebody will provide you a mic.
By the time the questioner comes, can I just take a
Sure,
10 second to make
Of
a
course.
factual correction, not of Dr. Isaac, but of a widespread misconception. The existing reservation for socially and educationally backward classes is not caste-based reservation. It does not polarize society on the basis of caste. I gave to the Supreme Court facts to show that in many states, Brahmin communities are in the socially and educationally backward classes. Every caste and every community in this country is entitled to be considered to be declared socially and educationally backward on the basis of more than 20 criteria of economic, social, and educational backwardness. If you meet those criteria, you're entitled to reservation. People from every religion, people from every varna, from every caste are in the backward classes and in the other. But for a presidential order, people from all religions would also be in the scheduled castes, and they are in scheduled tribes. So what is the existing reservations are creating a polarization between those who are actually socially, educationally, and economically backward, because the criteria includes economic, and those who are socially, educationally, and economically forward as groups. 103rd Amendment is the first amendment that actually is introducing for upper caste reservation, which is caste-based reservation. So that's a big lie that existing reservation is caste-based and it is polarizing around caste. It just so happens that those who are socially, educationally backward are mostly from lower castes. And so the only upper caste-led national parties like CPM and CPI and Congress are defending EWS because they want to give reservation to their own communities. And misrepresenting the reservation of SCBC as caste-based reservation. It is not. And so let us preserve this, and if there's any group that is socially and educationally backward and has not been included in the OBC, they should come forward. We will help them, regardless of what caste they are, what religion they are. We will ensure that they are included in SCBC and given necessary assistance. But let us not start on this myth that existing caste reservations are caste-based. They are not. Just a clarification.
Well, since our point of discussion is not on reservation, I shall not elaborate on this. But Mohan Gopal, reflect upon the post-Mandal polarization that took place in India. And that was the specific context in which, for example, Bihar and so on put forward this formula by which a kind of wider unity for reservation is maintained.
I will request Mr. Vasu to invite us for a post-Mandal polarization Dakshin dialogue, and we'll take it up from there.
Sure.
I don't want to get diverted.
Okay, are there any questions from the floor? Gentleman there, right at the back.
Good afternoon, panelists. My name is Liuddin, and my question will be with Barrister Asaduddin Owaisi. I think the most recent is happening about this Telangana day. I would like to ask Mr. Owaisi to give a political response for this as a federal, because of how he thinks the federal principle while the central government announces a particular day, and the same way the state government celebrating. So keeping in this context of federalism, how this question you think?
I don't think so. This relates to the topic which we are discussing. But you see, the Prime Minister wants to even release the cheetahs in a park. So I cannot say more than that. So, thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody else have a question?
యా నా పేరు యశ్వీరావు. ఒక చిన్న ప్రశ్న తెలుగులో మాట్లాడతాను నేను. యా ప్రభుత్వాల్లో అసలు ఉద్యోగ కల్పన అనేదే లేనప్పుడు, రిక్రూట్మెంట్ అనేది చాలా నెగ్లెజిబుల్ అయిపోయినప్పుడు అసలు రిజర్వేషన్లు ఎంతవరకు డౌన్ ట్రాడన్ పీపుల్కి ఉపయోగపడుతుంది?
Justice.
I will translate it for the panelist. The gentleman there wants to know, at a time when employment rates are so high and when recruitments are at such low numbers, does reservation really serve the purpose, and what is the point of reservation?
No, sir, I think it's a very good point, and that is why we have a creamy layer exclusion. Those who are entitled to reservation are people whose parents come from not the creamy layer exclusion for economically weaker section is for 8 lakhs, which is 66,666 rupees a month. If you get less than that, you're entitled to EWS reservation. But SCBC and SC/ST reservation, the creamy layer, the cutoff is much lower in many parts of the country, and there are also many other exclusions. So the attempt is that those who are, there are two aspects. First, those who are most deserving, the poorest, should get it. And if we can strengthen that, we should strengthen that. We have a scheme for that called, which the Supreme Court has put in, for creamy layer exclusion. The second thing is that this is not only about poverty, it is about representation. So economically weaker section is giving representation to the overrepresented. Whereas the purpose of reservation was to give representation to the unrepresented. So if you take the Supreme Court, you take the Irava community, the largest OBC community of Kerala. Not one single member of the Irava community has ever been a Supreme Court judge in 72 years. Not one single Yadav, to my knowledge, has been a member of the Supreme Court. 2 Muslims and 2 Dalits have been Supreme Court judges from Kerala. Honorable Justice Chelameswar was one of our very respected and much admired and appreciated Chief Justices of Kerala. 2 Dalits and 2 Muslims. But every other judge who has gone to the Supreme Court from Kerala is either upper caste Hindu or upper caste Christian, Syrian Christian. Now, this is only one example. In every state, the lack of representation at the highest levels, yes, there's plenty of reservation at class 4 level. But when you come to the peaks of power, you'll find that there are only 3 or 4, there's an oligarchy of 3 or 4 communities that control this country and control every state. In Kerala, it's 2 communities that control, an oligarchy of 2 communities that control the state, and we are told that if we give reservation to the not so poor amongst them, somehow that will help us with progressive polarization of politics. The most unconvincing argument I've ever heard in defense of EWS. I wish he had argued to the Supreme Court, we would have won the case against EWS. But it is about representation. Now, if we get a seat in the Security Council and the UN tells us, yes, we'll give you a permanent seat here, but only the poorest amongst you who's, will come and sit on that seat, will we accept it? We want the most effective representative there. So let us understand that the first battle is for representation of all communities, of all groups, all social groups, whatever they may be, right or wrong. But if people organize themselves into groups, they deserve a voice in the governance of this country. That is a principle we are fighting for. But I'm entirely in agreement with you, sir. Amongst that, keeping representation in mind, the first preference must go to the poorest. There is a scheme for that. If it is not working, we must make it work better. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
My question might be aiming multiple people on the dais, but it's that shouldn't there be more things into the list 3 of the Constitution that is more famously known as concurrent list? Because the vertical reservation still lies with the center, I mean the union government, but the horizontal reservation still stays with the states. But the states can only make particular level of laws on reservations. For example, Tamil Nadu has 67% reservation, and recently Telangana government has also made a statement in the assembly telling that they want more reservations because the backward community here is more compared to the upper castes. I mean, from the Kalekar Commission in the 1953 to the Mandal Commission in the 1990s, most of them basically told in their reports that more than 80% of the population is basically backwards. So shouldn't the states have more powers in that particular case to make laws and make reservations rather than, the center making in a unidirectional method? Thank you.
Anybody want to take this question?
Just an addition to it, just aiming at Justice Chelameswar, shouldn't the court take more into judicial activism in this case? And what are your views on this, sir? Thank you.
The point is, there is nothing today, in my view, see the Article 15.4, 16.4, and now 15.6, 16.6, they just say nothing shall prevent the state from making reservations. So there's nothing preventing, and it's, as you say, it's being done at the horizontal level, there's nothing preventing any educationally, socially backward group from being given a reservation. That's why we have a state list of OBC list and central list. Scheduled caste and scheduled tribe is different. Scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, the list is controlled by parliament. Only parliament can include and exclude. And that is, again, historically starting from 1935 Act, and also a concern at the time of the Constituent Assembly that the states were dominated by regressive oligarchic forces at that time. They still continue to be, but there was a good reason not to leave the fate of the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes in the hands of the state. So on federalism, I think, yes, I totally agree with you. There should be greater initiative by states for social justice. I have signed, and several of us have signed, and months ago sent to the Chief Minister of my state with all constitutional justification why Kerala should conduct a state census. Because to make these arguments, we must have data. You're an economist. We must have data. And unless we have data, we should not make these arguments. But the government is refusing to carry out a state-level census. And let's get the data and then have the argument and the discussion. So states must take greater initiatives. I fully agree with you. And the Constitution does give them, especially for backward classes, not for scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, a lot more leeway than is now being exercised. Justice Chelameswar.
Sir, I'm afraid how this federalism, which is a bigger topic, after all getting narrowed down to reservation topic only, and also it is, most of the views that are expressed here seems to be more biased rather than in a very enlightened manner. So I mean, if the panelists want to discuss about reservations, let us call for a different debate on it. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Your point is noted, sir. We will definitely consider something on those lines in future events. Thank you. Thanks to all the panelists.